Welcome to RB's Kitchen Talk. Thanks so much for joining me and my guest tonight. I have, excuse me, Ebony Relaford, Elder Henry Stevens, and Josephine Garrell, who's known as Energy. Thank you so much for being with me. Let me just ask, Joe, how's the music? How's the music coming along?
The music is great.
Yeah.
I released an album in January and it's doing very, very well.
Won-
Good.
Congrats. Great
Wonderful.
feedback. Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to
Thank
have
you
to
for
have you
having
back and tell us a little bit more about what's been happening. So, very good. So, let me do the introductions, okay? And then we can get into our discussion, which is on demystifying mental health. We know that there are lots of people who are afraid of therapy, afraid of the word mental health. And it really is nothing to be afraid of. It's just like, going to see a physician for an ailment. It's seeing someone because you're troubled or you have certain feelings and you can't really reconcile them. So I'm hoping tonight to be able to share a little bit more about mental health so that we're not as afraid of it and we'll find ourselves moving more towards it so that we can deal with some of the issues that we may be dealing with. Elder Henry Stevens is a servant of God. He is married to Anita Stevens. He's been married for 7 years. He attended Bowling Green State University, where he majored in political science. Elder Stevens is a case manager and serves as a consultant in social services in urban Cincinnati. He works with the homeless, formerly incarcerated, and the mentally challenged. Elder Stevens Hank is passionate about offering alternative solutions to living a quality life. Ebony Relaford is a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed certified drug and alcohol counselor. She graduated from Fairleigh Dickinson University with a bachelor's in psychology, and from Rutgers University with a master's in social work. For the past 7 years, she's worked with children, adolescents, and adults in behavioral health, which includes mental health and co occurring disorders, such as substance abuse issues. She is an integrative therapist, trained in motivational interviewing and trauma informed care, and has helped people process through their traumatic experiences through various therapeutic interventions and linkages in the community. And finally, but not least, is Josephine Garrell. She is a singer and songwriter. She currently works as a social service employee. She is a voice actress and mindfulness meditator. She's also in graduate school pursuing a degree in clinical mental health counseling. Jo is a lover of music. It serves as a creative outlet for her. Music is also a coping mechanism when life gets overwhelming. She enjoys creating melodies that dance over the music and seeps into the soul. And she recently released an album, and we're just so pleased. It's called Euphoria, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right?
you are. Yes,
Okay, great.
you are.
All right, so let's get into this. My first question is for Ebony. Tell us what made you decide to become a therapist.
I decided to become a therapist because I grew up in Irvington, New Jersey, which is in Essex County, very urban area, city-like. And it was interesting to me that I could grow up with my friends, and we were all raised similarly, come from different, same or similar backgrounds, but all chose different paths in life. And for me, that was very interesting because it made me realize that there had to be something else aside from the way that you were brought up and the way that you were raised, something else aside from the parenting that you received. So that sparked my interest in social work specifically. Because social work tends to focus on the other factors that go into the human makeup. So that could be like the psychological realm, that can be the environmental realm, the social realm, the spiritual realm. And it could just be a multitude of those those things. So that's pretty much what pegged my interest in it.
Okay. Now, there are a number of misnomers around therapy, around mental health. Share with us what some of those are.
A big one is fear. Fear of being labeled, fear of being judged. People don't want to carry around these things, these diagnoses. Once you're diagnosed with something, if it goes as far as warranting a diagnosis, then people tend to say, for example, I'm bipolar, rather than saying, I have bipolar disorder, which is two different things. You don't have to carry that label as your persona. Another thing would be that medication is mandatory. A lot of people are scared to be on medication, and not every person's situation requires medication. Some people can get through the things that they're going through via talk therapy, and that's it. Some others with maybe more severe things going on may require medication, but it's always an option. It's never something that you have to do.
Mhm.
I would say also people tend to say you can just get over it. Oh, you're just sad. You can just get over it. And it's really not that easy for some. So maybe it has worked for some to just, continue being busy and doing whatever they do. But for many, it's not as simple as just getting over it.
Mhm.
And then I would say another thing is um, feeling like you shouldn't have to pay a stranger to talk to. I can just talk to my friends. I can just talk to my family. And that's a huge misnomer, because a therapist isn't just a person you talk to. A therapist is a person who's strategically trained to evoke different types of change talk within you, or help you come to some sort of conclusions about what it is that you're going through. We're not there to advise. We are there to just help you keep that self-determination and keep your autonomy, which is your independence. So it's a 50-50 process. And I think a lot of people forget that part, thinking that, they're just going to be there talking and I'm going to be telling them what to do, or any therapist is going to be telling them specifically what to do.
Okay, so is there any particular population that you find has held on to these misnomers more so than others? And what I'm thinking of is the study that you performed in the Black community. So, can you talk a little bit about the sociology around mental health and this study that you performed?
Yes. So, working with minority populations specifically, I would definitely say it's noted that, or in my experience, it has been noted that Black people, Hispanic people, and Asian people of those descents have a little bit more trouble reaching out for help until maybe they reach a level of crisis. Then it's at a point where they're willing to ask for help. In my experience with Black people, it has been when asking, we come from so many different turmoil types of a tumultuous history, that we're strong, we have to be strong, we have to be independent, we
Mhm.
can't ask for help. So that's within the Black community. And then within the Hispanic community, it's been similar. They are always told, you just work, 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 work. If you're feeling depressed, no, it's just sadness, it'll go away. Keep yourself busy, and then things will get better. And then for the Asian community, in my experience, it's been the pressure of feeling like they can't ask for help because they are not allowed to be less than perfect, specifically with academia in that community. Anything less than perfect is looked down upon. Therefore, they don't feel like they're allowed to be overwhelmed. So those populations have been, in my experience, they struggle most with accepting mental health and services. And the study that was done came from the National Association of Mental Illness, which is NAMI. And it was a survey, a questionnaire that was given to specifically the Black community. And it asked questions surrounding hesitations about going to seek therapy. And the biggest outcome was everyone was fearful of services and being labeled and having that stigma attached to them.
Mhm. I like what you said earlier about not everyone who has therapy or goes to therapy requires medication, you know, and that the labeling that we often hear is not necessarily a labeling. I think you mentioned you can have be bipolar, but not necessarily be labeled as being bipolar. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. So, what I mean by that is the way we speak, our terminology. So, instead of saying I'm bipolar, because you may carry a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, you can say I have bipolar disorder. So, it's not something that you have to take on in your personality. This is just something that you struggle with from time to time.
I see. Okay. So now let me ask you, Hank, tell me about the folks that you've worked with in the populations that Ebony referred to, and how people have been able to at least acknowledge that they have an issue and address it. What's been your experience?
Well, most of the time, it seems that people don't want therapy until that's the last resort. That they wait until things are really, really bad, and they find themselves in my office or maybe Ebony's office or something like that when they feel like it's all that they can do. It's the last resort. That's their last choice. Um, a lot of the homeless people I've found have challenges, based on some of the mistakes they've made in the past. And there's a certain amount of pride too, and that pride is can keep people from growing and welcoming different ways of life. And when you've been doing something for so long, it's really difficult. And it takes courage to get therapy, to ask for help. Like she was mentioning about the Asian people, that it takes courage to finally realize that, hey, I can't do this by myself, and I no longer want to be by myself. I need help. I don't know if that answered it, but
It does. It does.
Mhm.
So, in your experience, if we were just to kind of switch a little bit to believers, what do you think has prevented many Christians from seeking therapy? Would it be the very same things?
Well, a lot of times I think uh, people use spirituality as a coping mechanism to cope with different things, and prayer, turning it over to God, and not really being able to look at it. Um, a couple things I thought about the scripture: renewing our minds, and also that we're supposed to love the Lord with all our heart, mind, and soul. Now, how do you love the Lord with all your mind? How do you? And I think you love your Lord with all your mind by developing your mind, being able to accept help, being able to grow and to continue to grow. We can't, with the pandemic and wars and things like that, we can't use some of the coping mechanisms that we used years ago. It just doesn't work. And I think that a lot. And I think a lot of people just won't go to therapy until that's all that and that's the only alternative they have. That's what I found, you know.
So that would mean something different for everyone. So reaching a rock bottom situation is going to be different for everyone. Tell me, Joe, what is it that led you to seek therapy? And I mean, I could talk about myself all day, but what led you to make that decision?
I feel like honestly it was multiple reasons. But the biggest reason is last year I suffered a pregnancy loss. And that was like the lowest that I've ever been mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And as soon as I knew what was happening, I was like, I just, to myself, I was like, I can't do this by myself. Um, yes, I know coping skills, but this is all that I could think about. This is my whole world right now. And I want to process it. I want to actually heal and not just gloss over it and keep doing life without recovering from that. So that was the main reason why.
So I've heard a couple of things already about how we do life, or how we don't address. We will find other things to think about, other things to do, as opposed to looking at the issue that we have. And for some people, that's been good enough, But something has driven other people to therapy. What do you think it really takes? Is there something that's common? Is there some sort of recurring theme, Ebony, that brings people to the point of, I need to speak to someone who's professionally trained to help me?
Yes, I would say there are multiple things. There it can be anything chronic. So a person experiencing some sort of chronic symptom, which is debilitating for them. So that could be something such as depression. Sometimes people experience depression to a point where they don't leave their rooms, they're no longer showering, things of the sort. I would say substance use is a big one. Some people start to abuse different substances, unhealthy relationships or inappropriate relationships, attachment issues, self harm, suicidal thoughts, um, a- any multitude of things, really. But those are some recurrent themes that I've seen.
So if we look at therapy, in and of itself, Joe, tell me how a therapist is very much like a physician, or how we should look at us as a therapist, as a physician.
Yes,
How do
that's a
you
great
see
question.
Yes.
That's a great because I firmly believe that therapists, social workers, counselors should be on the same level as physicians, even like pay wise, because we're doing internal work. And that's something that takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of time, compassion, empathy. And yeah, so I just feel like it should definitely be seen as equal. Whereas, physicians, they're looking at the physical realm, what's going on with your body. We are looking at the holistic approach, where like um, therapy is so amazing because if I'm feeling sad, if I'm feeling down, if I'm stressed out, if I have anxiety, I can talk to someone and they can ask me questions and get me to think deeper, challenge me, help me develop skills that I can maintain and to, like survive and cope through my challenging moments. So I feel like it's very similar, whereas, we're checking off, like, could it possibly be this that's in your, that's happening for you. Let's talk about this. Let's process it. Let's go like a little bit deeper. So I feel like
Mhm.
it's the same when I'm done. Like for me, like my therapist, we're working, and as we're working, I'm feeling better. I'm able to have my triggering moments, but they're just moments as opposed to my entire world. Now I have these moments where, I can cry, I can go through struggles, but I'm going through it. I'm healing from it. The things that used to be so big for me aren't big. So I feel like they may not cure the issues that I have, but I'm able to cope a lot better with
Okay.
that.
All right. I like that. So now, Hank, I've got to ask you a question. So for a believer, they go to God,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
And they speak to God through prayer, through scripture. So why would a believer need therapy?
Well, I thought about, and Ebony mentioned substance abuse and people self-medicating, using different things to self-medicate. And I thought about recovery. And I thought about, for myself, I was a felon and things like that. And I did maybe 15 rehabs or something like that, all for a lot of different reasons. But the last time something clicked, and in that I just kind of gravitated toward the therapy, of a group, of having a sponsor, of having somebody that would look at some of the things that I was going through, and someone that had things in common. Now, I had read all this stuff before, but while I was incarcerated, I had plenty of time to actually really, really look at it. And I think that I learned more spirituality and recovery than I had an opportunity to take a different look at it. And I think that spirituality is so important. And I think I thought about personal trainers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and personal trainers are capable of helping you work different parts of your body, you know. And maybe you don't want to do the stomach work, the sit-ups and stuff like that. You refuse to do the sit-ups. You refuse to look in that area of your body. And the same thing is with areas of our lives. I mean, some people just don't want to look at those things. And there's pride, and there's the way we've always done things. My grandmother didn't do this. My father didn't do this. And I applaud the two young ladies with me today, because they're eager about it, and they see that it works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you begin to see somebody that it has helped, then maybe they're more apt to try it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
So it does. Ebony, let me ask you this. Would you agree that for the most part, everyone has had, most people have experienced some traumatic event in their life? And as a result of that, it has affected them emotionally or mentally. Would you agree with that as a experienced therapist?
I would agree, because trauma is subjective. So there is no one definition for trauma. If you feel it's a trauma, it's a trauma. If it was a traumatic experience to you and it caused some sort of alteration maybe in your emotions or your life somehow, then it was a traumatic experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I would definitely say that most people have had trauma.
So if I've had a traumatic experience and I cope with it however I desire to cope with it, maybe it's working all the time, to keep my mind off of it. Or maybe it's a church service or working in the church. Is that a fair coping mechanism? Is that acceptable?
To an extent. And I say to an extent because it's a good thing to try to stay busy and to not ruminate on the things that you've experienced. However, it can become unhealthy very quickly. So you can be suppressing instead of actually feeling what's happening, going through it and learning how to get through an experience like that. So, for example, with loss, a lot of people, when they experience some sort of loss, they avoid. And that's what it becomes. So if you're not processing and actually feeling what's happening, those feelings, and learning how to get through them, then it's unhealthy. But if you are actually doing the work at the same time and you're learning how to get through it, but you're also staying busy, then that can be a healthy coping mechanism.
Okay, so I think what I'm trying to get to is that there are a variety of things that we can all do to cope.
Oh, yes.
To cope. And I think that, and I'm going to use myself as an example, it would have been fine for me after having divorced to have kind of gone through the grieving process alone. Or I could have purchased books on grieving and divorce. And over a period of time, I could have found my way out. I could have, prayed and read scripture, whatever it took for me to get through my process. But what I did is I chose therapy as a way to help me get through that process. So is that fair enough to say that we can use a variety of forms to get us through the process without suppressing our feelings?
Yes. Yes, that's fair.
Okay. All right. So seeing that therapy is a very private matter, let me ask you, Joe, why do you think that young people within your age cohort aren't doing more or seeing therapists more often?
I feel like you have a mix. I do see that there are more, especially younger individuals, like in younger generations. I feel like they're more open and accepting to talking about themselves. But then there are groups of people that, because we may have learned certain ways to cope with things, that we're just not very open to being vulnerable. Being vulnerable is scary. And um, identifying that you have a problem is one thing, but then trying to figure out how to solve it can be very overwhelming. Some people may, younger people may not have the insurance to afford the services. And if they do have, certain insurances, they may not be able to like afford their copay, or there could be so many different issues. But also I just feel like just being focused on other coping skills that may not be healthy or as effective as therapy. And then they assume that that's what's best for them. But it's also the lack of education surrounding mental health. But I do feel like now recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like more recently, due to the pandemic, due to like what we see on the news, systemic racism, all these different things have allowed people to realize, like, I'm not okay. I'm not doing okay. And I feel like there's been more talk about mental health and that awareness, and offering free or free services or affordable services.
Right.
Yeah.
Hank, do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking too that, a lot of older people just use the coping skill. That's just who I am, and that's just who I am, live with it or whatever, I'm going to live with it. And it doesn't have to be so, I mean, it just doesn't have to. I mean, I just think about being in an active addiction. I just thought I thought everybody should get high, and I thought that was the best way to cope.
Right.
And the older I get, I find that sober people can't understand why people get high, and people get high can't understand why people get sober. And it's just, I just think that the older people, the friends of mine, they just use that. It's an excuse. It's not being challenged enough. Now, if you don't have anybody in your life that'll challenge you, and to that want something better, that really loves you, and really is able to reach you and tell you, hey, you don't have to live like this. You don't have to accept that. That's not good enough. That's not living. That's just existing. So
I agree with you, Ebony. What do you think? Are you agreeing? Yeah.
Yes, I am agreeing. I've experienced both ends of the spectrums that Joe and Hank both mentioned. Yeah, it kind of becomes a mindset for some people. Some people are way more accepting. They jump on it right away and they're like, okay, great. I would love to work on myself. And then you still have some of those people who are like, well, this is who I am. Take it or leave it. So, we have to still work and try to help, bring more awareness to those things.
Yeah. I mean, I think about this self-awareness, and maybe I'm more self-aware than I need to be or that I should be. But I know when I'm not feeling good. I know when I'm not feeling happy about my feelings. Feelings matter. I mean, I know when I'm feeling depressed. And if I've been feeling depressed over a period of time, that I need help. And I guess I'm not one who is that concerned about being labeled or concerned about the opinions of others, because how I feel is more important to me. And I have seen so many believers who, it wouldn't take a rocket scientist to see that they are bound. And yet they use the excuse of, laying their troubles on the cross, or putting it under the blood. And I think that for so many, it's because they're not willing to do the work. It takes a lot of work, whether you are praying, or whether you are fasting, or whether you're dedicated to reading scripture. It takes a lot of work to be free of certain conditions. And I know from a therapeutic point of view, we see a therapist, but there's something that's required of us, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what are some of the things that are required after the session ends? Joe or Ebony, what's required of the person? You don't just sit in that chair for 45 to 50 minutes and then walk away. When you walk away, there's some challenges. There's some things you've got to work on. Am I right?
Yes.
Ebony, do you want to?
Sure. When you leave that chair, you have to do work. So you have to do work. You have to think. You have to dig deep. You have to question things. You have to do a lot of self-reflection. You have to maybe engage in journaling. So a lot of people don't want to take the extra time to work on that because of that, the time frame that it may take. And also those emotions that can possibly surface, and then being alone, so to speak, in that moment to handle it yourself. So your therapist isn't in a room with you. Your therapist, you may not be able to call your therapist and say, hey, I just thought about, this thing from my past and I'm feeling anxious right now. You have to process it alone. You have to start trying to cope alone at that time. And for many, that could also be scary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Joe, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I agree with Ebony. I also feel like some people may just think that therapy is a great place to vent, release everything that's going on, and then you're going to magically feel better. And that's not the case. So there is work that's required, and I feel like that can be overwhelming. For personal experience, I enjoy the in-between sessions because, number one, like, when I go back to my session, I get to process and talk up and share all of the different things that I may have experienced and learned. Lots of different lessons come through in between those sessions. Mm-hmm. I may not get like homework per se, but just in my daily life or whatever someone is struggling with, you may have a challenge, like Ebony was saying, and you can't call your therapist. So you have to do the work and embrace those skills that you've learned along the way. Mm-hmm. And those are I like to think of those as like, that's the true test right then and there. Like I've developed all these wonderful coping skills. Now I'm being triggered. What am I going to do? I need to go back to those coping skills. I need to go back to what we've talked about and what we've discussed. So I think it's really important to realize that there's lots of stuff that goes on in between the sessions.
Right.
I like to say something.
Sure.
I remember in therapy, there was this, it was a feeling sheet and it had all these different faces and stuff like that on it. And that was just fascinating to me because here I was able to describe exactly how I felt. And that was something that, I began to practice. And then as I was praying, I began to be more honest with God, be more specific, not all the generalities, just generalizing what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
And I think that when I began to be honest with how I felt, then I could be honest to other people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that feeling sheet was like, was for a man, an older guy, we just weren't going around expressing how we felt or being able to describe, how I felt and stuff like that. But then I had the sheet, I could just point at the stuff. And then after a while, it seems as though I memorized all those little things. So I said, how do you feel today? What's really going on with you? And as I began to pray, I was being to be really honest with Jesus. I was I started to be honest. He knows anyway. Mm-hmm. And, when you have and that's what a relationship is. It's not just Sunday morning, a good music and a word, then you go on home. It's about the whole week, each and every day and you want to grow closer to him as you learn about yourself. And it is a process. And sometimes insight grows slowly. It grows slowly. It's not not for everybody. Some things, pop and for you, and it's okay, but just some things just take a little time. And then I always like, and I like supervision as, one of my bosses. You got to go and, talk about all of those different things. And that's important because I don't want to carry all the stuff, the weight of all these other people, and because what I was getting at is sometimes when I'm sitting with somebody as they're talking, or a counseling session, or we trying to map out something, I find something that maybe I hadn't healed on. And it's like, oh, wow, where'd that come from? Because they'll, and I try to stay subjective or object, which is it? Objective or subjective?
We got
Objective.
you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
I have a question here. And here's the question. What advice would you give to someone who has been in therapy and feels that therapy only helps to a degree?
Is that for me?
Yeah. Yes, Ebony, please.
Oh, okay. I would say maybe to try a non-traditional therapy. And what I mean by that is maybe someone can do like meditation, yoga, music therapy, art therapy, something of the sort, just to add on the side. Exercise has been proven to be very beneficial, and those other things. So not just the talk therapy, you can engage yourself in other activities. I would say to try that as something else.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I think
Okay.
Ebony said. Mm-hmm.
What if they have done that already?
If you've done that already, then I would say maybe try a different therapist. Sometimes we have to find a therapist that fits us, and whatever our issue is specifically. So to keep on the talk today about trauma, sometimes a person's trauma is so intense that they need a trauma-focused therapist, a person who's trained in the multiple approaches that can help a person heal from trauma. So maybe you wouldn't need a therapist who does DBT specifically, or any other type of therapy. Maybe you need a specific. I would say maybe that possibly.
Okay. Talk a little to us about trauma informed care trauma. Talk to us about that.
Okay, so I'm gonna just read off a basic definition of trauma, and then I'll go into trauma informed care. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so trauma can be individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So again, trauma is subjective. So whatever you may feel like was a traumatic experience for you. With that being said, trauma-informed care can be, it's an approach that we use in both clinical settings and non-clinical settings. Trauma-informed care involves, in a clinical setting, it would involve making sure that patients feel heard, or clients feel heard, welcomed, listened to. It can be anything as far as training, so making sure that staff's terminology is correct. And then in a non-clinical setting, it could be making the similar things. So it could be your organization, making sure your staff, wherever you are aware of what's going on. Some famous examples I like to give is that you never know what a person has been through. So I'm not a person who runs up to people and give hugs. You never know. If a person is comfortable, then that's fine. But trauma-informed care approach wouldn't recommend to do things like that. So just being aware that you never know what a person has been through. So try to keep strict boundaries, but also still being warm and welcome at the same time.
So in other words, what about the words that you speak? Could that trigger some reaction without even, okay, it could.
Definitely. Tone could. A person who may have been abused as a child, emotionally or verbally abused, if you speak in a louder tone, that person can have re-traumatization. And as trauma-informed care people, we want to make sure that we prevent re-traumatization. That's what we're trying to prevent. That's the end goal.
So trauma informed looks at what happened to a person as opposed to what?
What's wrong with you?
Okay.
So instead of saying what's wrong with you, we're asking what happened to you. And so you're still held accountable for whatever your actions and your behaviors. But instead of pinpointing them to you as a person, we're asking what happened that led you to behave this way, or what happened that led you to feel this way.
Okay.
So it's more of an understanding approach rather than something that seems punitive or judgmental.
Okay. And people are generally, I'm thinking, able to talk about what happened as opposed to answering the question, what happened, or how you're feeling, because sometimes people aren't really able to tell you how they're feeling, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's true. You actually mentioned something earlier where you said for you personally, you know your emotions, you know what's going on with you. And I felt like that is the strong point. So that's where your awareness is. Your awareness is at a great level and others may not. So as Hank mentioned about the feelings chart, I use that often because, people will generally give you surface answers when you ask them how they feel. It's always good. And the person that's saying good has the most blank face ever. So, you're like, what does that mean? What is good? What is good? So, and I'm a victim of that. I say good sometimes. So I'm not saying it as if I don't say it, but there's always something else that's going on. So I believe that a lot of that comes from awareness as well. And once you're able to identify the emotion, then you can start to process it. So it starts from the ground up pretty much.
I remember one of the first things that my therapist said to me was, I kept telling her that, I want to feel, or I don't want to feel, or I want to feel this way. And what she told me was that the most important thing is for you to feel. Whatever you are feeling, allow it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, you won't get over that feeling, or you won't go to the next level. You won't be healed. You won't be made whole unless you feel. And I think so often we don't want to feel. I didn't want to feel what I was feeling, but I had to in order to recover. Yeah. And when I think about Christians, I think sometimes we forget that we are body, we are soul, and we are spirit. And that the emotions that we have come from that soulish realm. And we feel angry, right? Jesus was angry, but we have these emotions and it's for a purpose. We wouldn't be as creative, we wouldn't be as caring if we didn't have the emotions, but our emotions can be attacked, they can be hurt, they can be abused. I mean, and I'm not sure if I'm using the right terminology, but we're composed of not just spirit. We have these feelings and we've got to be able to recognize them, identify them, and deal with them and not try to bury them at every cost. I mean, I wonder if anybody agrees with me on that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm really passionate about that because, if we don't feel and allow ourselves to recover, we will remain in the same predicament for year after year after year. And this is without any medication. This is even without any labeling, because we won't acknowledge that we have issues, and we'll never get better. We'll never get better. I have another question. Why do you think the Black community doesn't share past trauma within the family? Why is secrecy such a big thing in the Black family? Hank, you want to take it, and then I can ask.
Well, I just think it's a matter of pride, and secrecy is a coping skill for the families. There was, most families have some things that went on that they try to bury them, but they all, it comes out in another form if it's not dealt with. And I was just thinking about what you were talking about, your feelings and stuff like that. That feelings aren't wrong; it's just what you do with them, you know.
Mhm.
And it's not, it's okay to feel, you know. And just a lot of our families, African American families, they just didn't know that, they didn't know how to deal with these things, you know, and they were just accepting of them and just avoiding even dealing with them because they were so painful and hurtful. But it managed to attach themselves to their lives and their psyche or whatever, and just kind of almost keeps us stuck, or it might even destroy us.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Ebony, do you want to?
Sure. Yes, I'll piggyback off of Hank. Definitely, everything. I agree with everything you just said. The pride, a lot of it. Again, I think I mentioned earlier, it comes from years and years and years ago. Like even all the way back to slavery. It's intergenerational. Black community specifically, a lot of things have been passed down from generation to generation to generation, and we're still dealing with all of that. We're still dealing with learning how to process emotions. When our ancestors were slaves and things like that, they didn't have time to process emotions. They had to just get through it, do what they needed to do to survive and raise their kids. So it's a lot of it is intergenerational. And then I would also say that there is fear of judgment always, and
Mm.
not being believed. It's unfortunate that many people do express their traumas or their experiences to their families, and then it gets shoved under the rug or no one follows up on it, specifically with abuse, I want to say. And that right there, that makes a person hesitant to tell you what's going on with them if they're going to be judged or if they're not going to be heard. So I do believe that secrecy and not sharing goes into those things.
Um, Gosh, I want to ask say this question, read this question to you, but I have another follow up. If the next generation knows, will this help to break the cycle? So I think this kind of goes to the question, Joe, with your age cohort. If many more uh, folks your age within your age group are seeing therapists, there's better opportunity or chance of kind of doing away with the pride and the fear, and their children will then be able to be more expressive and won't carry some of the same issues with them. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, I do. I feel like a lot of people are getting tired of how things have been the same in their family system, in their personal lives, changes occurring. So, with that, it's going to shape how, like, my generation with their children, they're going to be like, more open, more accepting, more understanding of mental health and how they're feeling. And then it just continues. So, it could definitely change the
Mhm.
generations for sure.
Okay. I just have a few more questions, and this one is for Ebony. If our past, if childhood experiences affect us in adulthood, and I've been reading so much about this, if you agree with that, how do our childhood experiences show up in adulthood? What are some recurring themes that you see?
So I would say some recurring themes that I've seen before has been a big one has been the relationships. So childhood experiences with different types of unhealthy relationships or inappropriate relationships, sometimes promiscuous behavior. There's the substance use. There's actual medical issues that can come along with it, kidney disease, heart disease. Those things are also consequences of childhood traumas and experiences. Then we have the other things such as depression. We have the self-harm behaviors, a lot of personality struggles as far as like severe attention seeking behavior, which links with self-harm behavior.
Mhm.
And I would just say those are like the main ones. Those are like the recurrent themes that I see often, almost on a daily basis.
There are some resources in communities that can help people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So resources in the communities vary by county and state, but there's always some community mental health place in each county. There should, and a community mental health place is a place that is accepting of anyone, regardless of insurance or not. If you do not have insurance, they put you on a sliding scale, which means your payment is zero. So you get to have therapy services for free. In those community services and at those mental health clinics, you can also receive, aside from individual therapy, if you need some sort of medication monitoring, you can see a psychiatrist or a psychiatric APN, any type of physician. You could also have some group therapy aside from the individual therapy. And there are also support groups. So you don't necessarily have to talk about your personal experiences all the time, but you can go to a support group and sit amongst other people who have had the same or similar experiences as you, and you guys can, they can process experiences. So we have those community places. Those are all like outpatients. Of course, you have inpatient places like rehabs. And then as far as, I would even say employers. So for those who are employed, a lot of places of employment these days have employee assistance programs, which are pretty much the connection to get you therapy. If you tell your job, your HR department that you're struggling, you need some time off, they can give you mental health days, which is time off. They can help you with like short-term disability or something to take time away. And then they could also give you a referral for therapy.
Okay. Right, thank you very much for that. Are there any closing remarks? Joe, any closing remarks? Anything you'd like to say before we end this discussion?
Sure. Team therapy. I'm all for it. I think it's very important. I know that people may be scared, and that's okay. That's part of the process. But do it afraid. Be able to, feel better. The goal is inner peace, feeling good, and being able to cope with life stressors, because life is always going to have some form of stress. There's going to be down moments or dark phases of our lives. That's just how life is. So if you can figure out how to get through those moments in a healthy way, you should totally do that because you deserve it.
Sounds good. Sounds good to me. Hank, any closing remarks?
Well, I'd like to say just being vulnerable is okay. That's how we grow. And I just think that, we continue, if we want to be free, you can be free in Jesus, and you can learn to love yourself and learn to love others, and learn to be honest with yourself and learn to be honest with others. That's just important to just walk this thing out and just do it. Just do it.
Sounds
And
good.
I also like to say the two young ladies, Joseph and Joe and Ebony, you were great. You guys are great, and God bless you, and continue to do what you're doing. And Joe, I want to hear what you're singing, and Ebony, I look forward to the book that you're writing.
Thank you.
I have enjoyed all of you. Thank you so very much. And I feel freer. I feel much more liberated than I did before the show. And I'm just really hopeful that this broadcast will be a blessing to so many. And I like the words that you used, Hank, being vulnerable. And that's a big one for a lot of people. It's hard to do that, but I think that it's what's so desperately needed. And what's so wonderful about therapy is that no one has to ever know that you're going. The only person that needs to know is you.
Mm-hmm.
And as Joe said, the most important thing is to be free, and to live free. So it's going to take some work, but it's certainly doable. All right. Thank you all so very much, and be well, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
God bless.